Welcome to another edition of BASTA TV from the BASTA 2015 in Mainz. With me is Jay Schmelzer. He's Director of Program Management within the .NET team.
Yep.
So Jay, you are developing with your team the .NET Core, or at the .NET Core, the .NET Core
Correct.
2.
Yes.
Yeah, and you just gave a keynote here on the BASTA, and there were some really interesting features, and I would like to talk about with you now in detail. And the first thing is the thing Satya Nadella said, yeah, mobile first, cloud first. You're talking about the mobile experience, and you don't mean the device. What is this kind of experience, and how does it influence you as someone who is providing the tools to create it?
I think that's one of the things that often, when people hear Satya say mobile first, cloud first, they immediately on the mobile side get drawn to the notion of, oh, it's about mobile devices. And that's really, sure, they're a part of the story, but it's really more about the mobility of the user experience of the applications that you're trying to develop, right? Acknowledging that today we are a very mobile society. We move around to different locations. We have connectivity pretty much everywhere we go. And so being able to go and access the applications that you need to accomplish your job, regardless of where you are, and having an experience across those different devices, right? So whether you're on your phone, at a customer engagement or on a tablet, or sitting at your office or home on a PC, ensuring that your experience moves between those devices with you and you're able to accomplish what you want to, regardless of the device you're on, is really what that mobile first is all about. And that's really how we think about, from the .NET team, thinking about, okay, what kinds of things do developers need? What capabilities do they need to be able to implement that kind of an experience across many different devices and form factors?
Yeah, within this thinking, you decided that you have to bring some new tools into Visual Studio. This is Xamarin for the people who are coming from the .NET and C# side of development, and Cordova for the people who are coming from the web development with HTML and JavaScript. How difficult was this for you to implement, and even to change the mindset to say, now we are trying to provide tools which allow people to develop for iOS and Android from a Microsoft way of developing?
Yeah, I would say the mind shift is probably the biggest one, right? Like really changing the way we think about how we prioritize every device over a device, right? So ensuring that we're thinking about iOS, Android, and Windows all at the same level, as opposed to the many years of history and kind of muscle memory we've built up as an organization thinking about Windows only, right? Technology-wise, it wasn't extremely difficult. It was, we have a great partnership with the folks at Jahren that allows us to bring a C# and .NET developer experience to folks targeting iOS and Android development, native iOS and Android development. Cordova was a little more work in the sense that it's just participating with an existing ecosystem, open source project. There isn't a single vendor out there that we partner with like we did with Xamarin, but it's more partnering with an open source project. That one's interesting, and it involved both contributing to and kind of getting value from an open source ecosystem there, and helping provide plugins for the different device types that were out there that we were interested in. A lot of what we contributed back into the project was more around test cases and improving the overall quality of the Cordova project. Both have been really interesting experiences and very really great examples of how the mindset of the Visual Studio team is changing.
Jay, and you went a step further with these cross-platform thinking. You said, we want to have .NET cross-platform, .NET for Mac, .NET for Linux, .NET for Windows, where it used to be. And you developed .NET Core, at the moment .NET Core 5, which will come in the first quarter of 2016. What was the idea behind that? Why did you componentized it and break it up in little pieces? Can you just give a short picture of that idea?
Certainly. I'd say the motivation behind .NET Core was multiple aspects to it. One, if we first have to think about the .NET framework itself. So today, the .NET framework that we have was designed and built when a single integrated framework was a value proposition, was a thing that developers were looking for. So with the .NET framework, regardless of whether you're building a Windows desktop application or a website, you have the full framework there available to you to work with. As design patterns have evolved and we start seeing things on the server like microservices or small form factors like devices or even Internet of Things kinds of even smaller devices, we needed to rethink the way we approach the framework, and we needed to create something that, as you say, is more componentized or modular, that allows us to, or allows you as a developer to just bring in the pieces of the framework you need for your application, giving you a smaller footprint for the application, smaller memory consumption, those kinds of things. That was one of the big motivations. Then taking that forward, looking at the trends and saying, okay, we also know we need .NET to be available for in the cloud on Linux environments as well as Windows. For developers, we wanted it available on Windows as well as Mac to be able to build those applications. So starting with and taking that .NET Core, designed for modularity as well as, with the intention of and the eye to being available on multiple platforms is what brought us to the creation of this .NET Core.
Mm-hmm. I think that's an amazing thing for itself, to be available for any client, any device. But what I just learned, what really amazed me, was that when you thought about .NET Core on the server, you said we have to rely on Azure, which is there as a big backend, as a huge backend, and you set the whole system up on a microservice idea. And that's really intriguing. I mean, that's one of the most advanced approaches at the moment to design cross-platform and very fast service infrastructures. What is the idea of a microservice thing? What are the advantages for you?
Sure. So I think microservice is a design pattern, right? And the core concept behind a microservice application or architecture pattern is that you're really looking for creating small, very focused sets of services that can then be loosely coupled together to create an overall system. So historically, we would have thought of things as the order processing system or the product catalog system, right? Thinking about dissecting those into even smaller components that can be independently versioned, independently released, independently scaled based on the needs of the application. So if for example, historically it would have been very hard in a monolithic or single large service to scale just the product catalog if you saw a higher than normal browsing activity for your service. With a microservice, it's just those pieces that would need to scale into bigger instances or more instances of them, the rest of the system staying in place. Allows more agility. You can release individual services as often as you need to without having to worry about testing the full suite of the application. From the .NET Core perspective, the other aspect that this brings is we thought about .NET Core going to multiple platforms, both in terms of operating systems, but also in terms of operating environments like on-premise servers versus Azure virtual machines and so forth. Thinking about the services that historically folks thought of, or developers thought of as parts of the .NET framework, like message queuing or caching, and realizing that those themselves are independent services in a microservice architecture. And so pulling those out of a core framework and then just making them be modulars or components that can be added back in based on the underlying service you were implemented on. So for example, in an Azure environment, maybe you have a Redis cache, right? Or maybe you have an Azure queue service, whereas back on premise in a Windows environment, you have a Microsoft message queue service or something like that. And allowing you to plug in the independent services that make up the infrastructure of your application, as well as your own application logic.
Okay, you described microservices as a design pattern, and it looks for me that it's broken up in bits and pieces. How do you support the developer? How much do they need to know a bit about this design pattern, or how do they fit together all these bits and pieces for their applications?
Yeah, I would say the thinking that goes in for the developer that needs to happen is really thinking about small single-purpose solutions, thinking about designing for faults, right? Designing for failure first. So, designing with the intent that certain things may not be available all the time, and you need to be resilient and recover from those things. Thinking about your application in terms of what are the primary paths through the application that are the critical ones, versus what are the supporting services that are valuable and enrich the customer experience, but aren't the business doesn't stop if they suddenly become available. An example I like to use is, an online shopping kind of experience where you probably want the checkout and the shopping cart capability to always be there. You would never want that to be a failure. But hey, if the customer peer review feedback for an item doesn't show up one time when you're looking at things, that may not be the end of the world, right? It's certainly nicer when you can see what other people thought of the product, but you wouldn't have the whole site come down just because that service wasn't available.
Okay, and I suppose that Visual Studio is supporting the developers to develop for this kind of architecture system. Yeah,
absolutely. Visual Studio is adding a number of capabilities that are in various stages of preview to release for supporting the underlying technologies that really support microservices are becoming popular. Container-based solutions is a popular thing as far as microservices, Docker being the prominent container architecture today, or container service. So really having Visual Studio learn about how to build and deploy into those kind of container-based environments is certainly something we're working on as well.
Yeah, okay. There were a lot of new ideas and concepts, like microservices, Docker, containers, and things like that. Completely new sometimes to most of the .NET developers. And you just mentioned that .NET developers have to become aware of that they are now cross-platform developers with their .NET knowledge. Do they have to be very bold, very brave to do it, or do you think it's not very difficult for them?
Well, so I would say the important thing is for a .NET developer to realize they now can be a cross-platform developer. They don't have to be. They can, if Windows is still an amazing operating system and a great place to deploy your client and server applications, and we love that. I think it's more a matter of having .NET developers realize they can now be iOS developers, Android developers, Linux developers, right? And still build on all of the knowledge they've gained from the .NET development platform, so the language and the frameworks and so forth. Sure, there are certainly new aspects to it that they'll have to become familiar with. There's new environments they'll have to work through, but overall, our goal is to make it a familiar experience and easy for them to approach.
Okay, thank you very much for this insight, Jay. I think that's really amazing. From my perspective, I would like to ask you just to try it. Thank you very much.
Thanks.